Thanks for being here. We're going to introduce my distinguished panel as we go along. I'm Roman Mars. I'm the host of a show called 99% Invisible. It's a podcast about design and architecture and flags and other such nonsense. We're here to talk today about data, design, storytelling, and a little bit of AI with the fine people here, Aaron, Nancy, and Paula. So I'm going to start with Aaron, and I want you to tell folks about yourself and tell about what it is to be an investigative data journalist.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Being an investigative reporter is a very fascinating job. It's digging into details, trying to ascertain the truth out of things. And a lot of the work I did as an investigative reporter involved data. So having to get government data sets, records requests, things like that. Often these data sets were incredibly messy, disorganized, and have to make sense of them to tell a story. Through all of it, it's all about storytelling.
Right.
Sure.
And so I want to talk about your work here. And this is a project that you worked on with the Washington Post. And can you tell us a little bit about the sort of thumbnail of like what the research was, what the story you were telling, and a little bit about this image that you created for it?
Yeah, totally. So this was a broader project that was done at the Washington Post several years back with several reporters. The project was called Murder with Impunity, and the project was all around unsolved homicides in various parts of the country. To tell this story, it required figuring out okay, where are cases going unsolved across the country? Police departments don't have a unified set of data, so you're getting bespoke data with every jurisdiction you're trying to reach out to. But once you get that information, we want to analyze it and see where there are places where things are being solved and things aren't. And then to tell the story, this is like a really intense story, right? We're talking about murder, we're talking about loss, we're talking about, really tragic things. And so, it was really important that when we told the story, not to over embellish the violence of it, like the story itself, the words of the victims' families, that's where the power was at. So for the visuals, like the map and the charts, we really wanted to kind of don't use red, for example, right? Pick colors that tried to still tell the story, but in a way that didn't, introduce any unnecessary kind of emotional feel on the viewer side. Let the story do that.
I mean, that's so fascinating to me because it's like blue and orange. I don't know if I feel comforted by the idea that we're all such babies and lizards that the color red makes us go, oh my God, or I should feel good about that or bad about that. It's just sort of the way it is, isn't it?
Yeah, no, even when you see a street sign, right? Red stop sign, red stop light, yeah.
And so you're telling this story with sensitivity and nuance by just muting the colors a little bit. And I just think that's a great simple lesson in what you do and what designers have to do all the time. So you are no longer a data journalist. You went to work for Netflix.
Yes.
And you use some of these lessons when you're presenting data to the people at Netflix as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, the whole theme of this, around this is around data. And when I was I was originally on the content team at Netflix, and so a lot of the things I was working on were around the performance of our titles. And there was one time I made, a visual that used the color red, right? For this isn't good. And turns out people did not like that. And what I realized is whenever you're telling a story, whether it's with data, words, video, whatever, right? There's presumably the person on the other side seeing this visual is a person, and that person has feelings. And what I learned is when you're working with, in the entertainment industry, people are spending their whole lives, or a large part of their lives, trying to tell a powerful story. So for me to come in as a data wonk and be this is bad, red, it was a really, it was kind of basically insensitive to someone who was putting their, time and blood, sweat, and tears into creating something that they thought was like really powerful. So sure enough, I'm thinking I'm going to a Hollywood studio, a place that uses data, like they're not going to be sensitive about this, but turns out the lessons scaled, whether I was a reporter or working at a company like Netflix.
I think that's amazing. It's such a cool way to sort of like use these lessons across all the different work and realize that what you're doing when you're presenting data and trying to tell a story is that you really have to pay attention to who the audience is and who this is for so they get the best result in a listen response. And this is what you do, Nancy. Nancy Duarte, can you please tell the folks what your job is?
So I've written 7 books all about empathy-first communication through story as a vehicle. And my firm helps large enterprises influence others. So we'll do everything from get the execs up on the stage so that they have influence, help them with their talk, with their slides and their delivery, all the way through to training teams to communicate with each other, but also especially to customers. And it's all in service of driving change, and it helps create brand value to do that. So probably the more famous data story that we did was Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth. And some of you guys weren't even born back then, but back then it was like, who made those slides? They look good, because we didn't have Canva and tools like that when we did that. But that narrative, that whole narrative drove change. So that's like kind of an emblematic version of the work that we do. So my books have frameworks that people can apply and apply well, and it changes their lives. So if you think about data storytelling, right, you're an analyst and you can dig in the data and visualize it. But once you start to wrap it into a story, you become an explainer of data. And that is a job that'll advance you eventually to being a leader. Because if you can't communicate it, or you can't find the patterns in it like what you did, then your career kind of would stop at just being an analyst. So that's kind of the nature of what we do.
And so one of those ways in which you take a bunch of data and you're trying to elicit a response from like the C-level to do something is to put things into a 3-act structure like a story. Could you describe how your work creates that?
Yeah, so specifically for data, one of the things that happens is you will find a problem or an opportunity in the data, because people are collecting data all the time, and humans are generating the data. So humans usually are generating data. We're tracking swipes. We're tracking everything. So a human generated the data, and sometimes if you want the trajectory of your data to go a different direction, you need to convince the people to change. The very ones that generated that data need to change to drive, organizational health or change crime and stuff like that. So the 3-act structure is basically you found an insight from data, you show the data that needs to change, which is the messy middle, because it's going to take work to get that trajectory to change, and then ultimately, therefore, you take an action so that it creates a narrative that has a positive ending. And so there's a 3-act structure that kind of supports, especially data, if you're trying to become a strategic user and communicator of data that has influence. Shaping it in a specific way will get your exec's attention. So specifically, if you go in and use Canva's new prompt, and you want to create a report that you're going to give to the executives, you need to explain to them like the KPIs your execs are measured against. And when that report is done and you give it to the execs, they'll be like, that resonates with me because that's how I'm measured, and this is going to drive my own initiative forward. So pretty much everything we do is in service of like enterprise success and stuff. So
right.
Yeah.
And part of that, the practice of storytelling is this idea of like, and I watched you give a TED talk, and it isn't about telling a story where there's a hero journey, where there's like, the hero is in the story. What you're trying to do is set up so that the CEO is the hero, like you're just seducing them into the data, and then all of a sudden they know what to change, they know what to do, because you've kind of led them down the path.
Every CEO loves to be a hero. But yeah, that's what you do. Whoever you're speaking to is the one who's going to drive the change. They're going to be the heroic figure that makes the future a better place,
Yeah. And so the last panelist is Paula Scher, who we're yeah, of course, yeah. And what we're specifically, like, you've designed, like, everything in the world, logos like CNN, heard of it? She designed the logo for CNN, Shake Shack.
I didn't do CNN. That's a lie.
That's a lie?
It's a lie on
Oh,
the
tell me right now why that's wrong.
He got that from ChatGPT.
No, it's been on the internet for years. It's even in my bio when you Google. I didn't do that. I don't
Tell
know
these
who did
fine
it.
folks what you did do.
I
Did
don't
you
know
do
what to say. I
Boston?
did City, but I didn't do CNN.
Okay. You did
Sorry,
City.
guys.
No, the traveler cities.
But specifically, I know a lot of your work from album covers, which is like, I'm sorry guys that the world got so much worse, and big, beautiful album covers aren't available to you all the time, but they were a great canvas for design. But specifically, what I want to talk about is this project that you were doing with the OMB, and that's the Office of Management and Budgets with the federal government. So could you talk about what the project was and what this approach was about?
This was a really unusual project for me. I was working with the federal government in the Office of Management and Budget for 3 years, and I think the first thing we did was what was called the President's Management Agenda, which was making Joe Biden's agenda look terrific with pictures and layout and photography, et cetera. And he was actually very interested in better documents. As a matter of fact, he hired a director of government design to make the things better, which is how I got hired and what I was doing. And I was working within the section of government where they make reports that are their annual reports from government. And the reports are totally unreadable. They're completely unreadable because they're done by people who are working on specific projects in different divisions. Like there'll be somebody working to, create low-income housing, and they're afraid of getting criticized by builders or by other people, so they make the copy really dense and really deep, so you don't want to read it. The problem is the general public isn't doing that, and they don't get to read the copy that would actually tell you what the government is doing. So as a result of this thing, we began to shorten these documents by using ChatGPT, and we got to reduce the copy to be understandable and readable clumps that were really just several paragraphs within a structured website. I don't know if you have the things.
Well, let me show you. This is what the documents look like. This is what the inside of them looks like.
Spend a nice afternoon with that. It's just completely a disaster. And they really don't have any kind of staff graphic designers who are working with them individually, nor did they want it redesigned because as I said, they were protecting themselves against a certain kind of attacks from either other political parties or businesses or what have you. So we began shortening it and created a format for a website that was going to function and be able to be self-sustaining. And we had designed the website to be able to edit by itself by using AI and run, and be able to load in illustrations. And we made illustrations with Midjourney, which got a lot of blowback. And the reason we used Midjourney was because we had actually tested a couple of other AI systems, and they couldn't produce the same kind of quality. We created our own language, and sort of somebody on my team named Bruno Bergallo is an illustrator, and he did sort of beautiful forms that were made by hand, where you saw tape over them. They were hand painted, and they were programmed into AI, and ultimately built 1,500 illustrations that were all the different topics of the government. And the website could identify them and run it without a human actually participating in it. All the human would do would provide the essential research, which were those big, long things that got edited by a computer. And it was interesting because I was disappointed knowing it was not going to come out. And the election happened just at the moment we were finishing it. And it was a Biden administration initiative. It was never going to fly. But I posted it on the Pentagram website because I hadn't really seen how people were working with AI. All I could see was the fear. And I found out that for certain things, it's incredibly useful, and that the prompting is totally the key to the thing. So we still have the piece on the Pentagram site, and you can go to the site and you can read it and realize exactly how we made it and built it, and you can do that work with it yourself. It's not unoriginal. It is original. It's original you with a piece of equipment. And actually, all my work's been that all my life. So the technology always changes. You use the technology in the way it can best do your work, and accept what it can do and avoid what's bad. And that's my advice.
So Nancy, talk to me about this, the use of technology, because your job changes a lot. It's probably changing as we're speaking right now. And what are your take on using AI technologies to tell your stories?
I think it's a lot about the prompt. It's a lot about how expert you are. We string together different tools for different purposes, and I like using it kind of at the end of the day after I'm kind of like lost some of my creative juices, my original thinking's drained. I always save a project for the end of the day, because then when I put it into some of the LLMs, it feels like a little bit like a jetpack. So I kind of finish my day going like, whee, which is kind of nice. So I've had this agency and training business since '88, so that's definitely older than most of you. And I'm having to build software myself. So that's how much I want a front row seat. So I've been CEO forever. My exec team's running the business, and I've stepped into a product role. So I'm head of product now, just because I've got to watch and see and what's happening, what's moving, what do we need to do, what skills we need. But I'm just building really great stuff, in AI, and it's powerful when you have a methodology, which all my books are that, my training is that, and it just drives. I haven't seen output like this, so it's fun. I'm actually having the most fun I've had since I was an entrepreneur early on, so having a good time.
That's really amazing. I mean, you command, and it listens to you. I mean, that's sort of lovely.
And it doesn't talk back.
It doesn't talk back, doesn't criticize the input, sort of welcomes the input warmly, I would say. It's your friend.
It's a nice thing. Aaron, how are you using it?
Yeah, I had this aha moment with AI where, I think certainly for writing code, for example, it's a pretty powerful tool. But on a recent project I just finished, I wanted to kind of change a good chunk of the back of the code. And so I used AI tools, but I hadn't used some of the more AI agents or the agentic tools where they can actually move things around and work on your computer. So I literally was like, hey, I have all this stuff in this file that I need to change like this. Move this over here. If you identify a problem, fix it. And then I said, go. I went and made some coffee, came back, and it was done. And it worked. And I was blown away. And that was finally when I was like, oh, to your point, I want a front row seat on the technology and using it, because I think there's a huge opportunity if you tap into these systems and learn how to enhance your workflow. But I certainly also saw my entire career light on fire because I was like, oh wow, it can do so much quite well. And sure, there's things in the margins that I think I do better than AI, sir. But ultimately, as long as the software works and gets delivered to your client or whoever you're building it for, people probably like it.
That code is going to be exciting.
Exactly, yeah.
What this reminds me of is a little bit your career trajectory, Paula, is someone who, once drew and cut everything and then had a team of people who did a lot of stuff, and then you kind of edit it and to shape it into a design that you like. And now, instead of building that up in a firm, you kind of have it a little bit more at your fingertips, these agents generating stuff for you. But you still there's still a job to do to turn that into something meaningful. Do you think this parallel is fair, Paula?
I mean, I'll use it when it's the right tool to use. I'm not passionate about AI. I just found that in this particular instance where you had to make something that could self-sustain, it was the right tool to use. And that, I've viewed all my equipment since the X-Acto knife as my tool base. You know, I'm not particularly a tech person. I don't actually design on the computer. I sketch things and give them to my team. Yeah. I'm really old school that way, but technology has a purpose, and it can do a lot of good, and it also can do a lot of harm, depending upon how people are using it, how they're thinking about it, what the goals of business are with it, which scare me a great deal. We get a lot of calls with people thinking somehow they're going to save gobs of money by doing things with AI. No, they're not. They're not. Because somebody has to be thinking and telling the thing what to do, and they're going to want to write a bill for it. So, you know, that's the reality of the situation. And the conversations about it, I think, are kind of terrifying, you know, that when you think about the capability and where it's going to be in 5 years, and oh, it's going to eat us all and we're going to disappear, and maybe.
We'll have laundries too. We'll have robots doing our laundry, though, which would be nice.
I mean, you know, you just really don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I just saw, I was talking to a potential client who took me to a restaurant he was going to open that had robots making sandwiches, and it's quite a thing to see, and the sandwiches were perfectly delicious, you know, and there goes the kitchen staff, and you look at the thing and you say, well, that's cute, but maybe this isn't cute. Yeah. You know, I mean.
What I mean, I think that what I've found, and maybe this pattern will not hold, but this is the pattern I've found, is that when you squeeze out efficiencies, it's the same amount of money is always being spent. It just, the efficiencies dial in who gets the money.
That's right.
And if it's going to be platforms and tools, or if it's going to be humans, we have to figure out what that dial is so that, you know, we create things and there's still creators to continue to feed this system. Yeah. And it's just something I think is worth being mindful about, of course, you know. So this job of like, data is like very fascinating for people. It's very convincing for people. But your job as a designer is to edit that down to as a meaningful story. What is the process of doing that and pulling out the story instead of overwhelming people with the data and just like trying to convince them through brute force?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've all seen like the dashboard that has like 40 charts on it, and you know, it's so cool because it's a dashboard and it has a bunch of charts, but oftentimes those kind of experiences aren't great, because if you're a novice to the data set, or you don't have the appropriate context, and you see a bunch of cool charts with data, that's awesome, but it doesn't tell a story. So to your point earlier about like the 3-act approach, my approach is like the same approach I use as a reporter, which is what is the headline, right? If you have 2 seconds to understand something, how do I get at that? Okay, so I got my headline, now what's my lead? What's like the most important thing I should know? And then following that, you know, in journalism speak, we have something called a nut graph, which is kind of like the why. It kind of like sets up the whole reason why you're reading the story, and then from there, you kind of have some background information. I structure a lot of the tools and dashboards and reports I build like a news story. And to get at those answers, I do the same, like instead of interviewing a person, I'm interviewing data. So I'm digging through, I'm analyzing things, and I'm trying to figure out what is the most important thing. If you only have 2 or 5 seconds, if you're a CEO, you're getting bombarded by emails every day, pings from your team. So if I only have your attention for a very short amount of time, what can I convey that gets that point across? Sometimes that's a chart. Oftentimes it's literally text. It's copy, right? Yeah. And so that's where I do think, even as amazing as AI mini tools are, like that human, you know, insight into something that can kind of identify the importance part, because there's a lot of data can tell you all kinds of things, but oftentimes it's having the appropriate context and knowing who your audience is, kind of like we mentioned earlier, that really makes something impactful. So for me, the process starts with like I would a news story. Like I literally, like, it's like the data set is like someone I'm sitting across from, you know, like, and like we're having coffee and I have my notebook out and I'm asking questions. Yeah. To me, that's how you kind of start figuring out the story you want to tell.
Yeah. But I think that what we're eliminating from the conversation is the import of data visualization. And nobody does it better than the New York Times. If you look at, I don't know how many people have access to the Times, but if they'll run a big story on something and it'll be online, and they'll actually move you through the story while different images appear, whether they're maps or pieces of data that tell you the narrative, and you get sucked into it and you really understand it. And that is a key piece of making data work for you as a communication device. So many designers have become data visual artists with it, and it is really terrific. And it makes information accessible to the public in a way sometimes that looking at figures and looking at writing at the same time is a lot of reading. And sometimes imagery really helps make that much clearer.
But like, I've been alive during the period of time in which newspapers, it was considered kind of gauche to have graphs and pie charts and pictures. Like USA Today came out and it was like, you would have thought that everyone had dumbed down news, but I loved it. I was in elementary school and it was a fun paper to read, and it was welcoming and offered you a lot at a glance. And so like, how do you get to forward the idea of a story through design or through graphics when part of that, so people are entrenched in the old way of doing things, so it's not superfluous, it's not just dressing, it's actually key to understanding the story.
I think Canva charts is going to help us all because I just had this, one of my best chart data gals is on my team, and and we used the right chart, right? It was a stacked bar chart to show 100%. There were 3, it was the right chart. I'm like, this is the wrong chart because I cannot quickly see the insight, right? So we rebuilt it and come to find out when you turned them into categories stacked next to each other, it was a completely different meaning than you could see when they were stacked up. So the point is to get to the insight as fast as possible by stating an observation, what do you observe, and then visually annotating that through highlighting it or actually writing call-outs on the actual chart. So I remember USA Today used to have goofy graphics overlaid over, but a really good annotation lets the CEO understand it in like 3 seconds. And so I do think the fact that Canva now has the data in AI. Don't go for the default. Don't go to whatever's the default in the Canva tools. Pick different ones, like I was just saying. Pick the different choices because you might have bias. You might have come into it with bias. You might think, oh, it means this. Cut it 2 different ways. Maybe it doesn't mean that at all. So really use it to not only remove the bias, but really pick the most effective way to convey almost instantly what you're trying to say.
Yeah. I've been thinking about this in regards to this project that you did, performance.gov, which you call a failed project because of the change in election, it didn't happen. But also, there's probably, even though you were reached out to, there's a vested interest in keeping things dense and complicated, and it's serious or whatever. Yeah.
It's often deliberate. I
mean,
it is. I think that making information interesting and absorbing is being kind to people, and that's our job to do that, and that deliberately obfuscating something is pointless. And information should be accurate, but it can also be entertaining in certain instances, and that is great because it gets people to read and understand things, and I think that's a really, really important job to make people want to read. And we have to do it as a community because we're going to be the ones who are going to make the information of tomorrow, all of you.
Yeah, no, I definitely think entertainment is super underrated when it comes to information design. I did a project years ago focused on the persistence of segregation in parts of the US. And I remember when I did this project, initially I kind of had a classic, if you've seen the Washington Post and New York Times, the classic white, well, this is pre-dark mode everything, but the white website, center well and then graphic, right? But for this project, I did dark mode basically, right? I went full, kind of this soft matte black background and then had the graphics on top of it. And part of why I did that was not only that I thought from an objective, design perspective, it had made the graphics easier to view, I just legitimately thought it looked cooler. And it turns out when I talk to people about that project, the thing that they often talked to me about is like, wow, that was like such a striking visual. Like I love the way it looked. And then at my current role, I just did a project where it was like a classic dashboard, but at the top I used the canvas animation to just have kind of like this like fluid dynamic thing in the background. No reason to do it. There was no like data that like made that look cool. But again, the first thing people said to me was like, that looks so cool. But guess what? They kept scrolling, which was my point. So I do think like, delightful design, the use of color, the use of contrast, like bringing these things into your work is just as important to me as like the accuracy of the data. Because Lord knows we've all seen like research reports or like you could do like an academic paper where yeah, there's charts, but like it's just super dense and ugly. And sure, there's a ton of information in there that I probably like, but I don't got time for all that, right? Whereas adding some color, adding fun, adding life, so to speak, to the things you design will engage people way more. And then you can still tell a very powerful story through that. And it's not to cheapen what you're doing. Like, obviously, don't add whimsy for whimsy's sake, so to speak. But people like good-looking things, and increasingly there's good design everywhere. I mean, all over this conference, there's so much good design. I'm looking at the outfits in the audience. People are dressed very well. Like, people like nice things, right? So, like, bring that to your work, too. Don't be afraid to, like, have fun while still trying to, like, convey the accuracy of what you're reporting on.
When we take stories and we're trying to get a response from someone, and we do things that we rely on, like 3-act structures, or even the 5-act of just like introduction, rise in action, climax, fall in action, denouement. How do you use those without turning them into cliche? Like, how do you present your work so that it relies on these things, so you don't have to do the work of storytelling from the very beginning, but moves it forward so that it has that kind of dazzle, like the wavy thing to get people going and in it? Nancy?
Yeah, I think it's effective if it has impact. So you can do things as long as it yields the results that you have. And I think what makes projects successful is the thinking. So that's what makes it not cliche. And we were talking about, is there anything original? Like, humans are going to have to come up with the very original thinking, right? And we can prompt and pull out of something things that have existed in the past. So Marshall McLuhan was a great communication theorist, and he had this thing called the law of media. What it said is, when one new media emerges, it obsolesces something. So television obsolesced radio, right? Podcast
continue.
Thing.
Yeah, okay.
But it obsolesces something. So I do think that this laziness that I'm worried about of relying on AI to do certain things. With the emergence of AI, what I think is going to obsolesce is critical thinking and creativity and being out of the box and pushing something harder and digging deeper, knowing that it's wrong. Like, how are people going to know something's wrong or could be better? And so I think it's easy to find a pattern or call it cliche, but I do think that when a human is involved in making something in the shape of a story, there's really no other mechanism. An empathy-based story will change lives more than anything in the whole world. And if you're trying to influence, it is in the narrative, it is in what you say. And when you use all these tools, right? We use all these tools to get people in the room a lot of times, to get the sales guy with the salesperson. We're using these tools. It's that last moment, like that last moment in the room when you have the eye contact. You can't mess that up, because hundreds of millions of dollars made that moment happen. And that's when you can't be cliche. You have to have mental models in your head around storytelling and around influence, and that's how, that's kind of what makes the engine of business run, is that.
So, Paula, when you think about this project here, there's different things to highlight when you have this much data. And I noticed that in some of the models that I've seen, sometimes it's the most important piece of data. Sometimes it's kind of the most interesting little kernel of data.
Yeah.
Like, when do you decide, like I always say to people that important is the least interesting form of interesting. So if you're only relying on important, you are losing a whole realm of interesting that you can use to bring people in. So when you're creating those, taking those sort of dense Byzantine reports and turning them into something. How did you know to edit, what to highlight, what to present? What was the thing that sort of called out to you?
Well, everything is different. I mean, you don't design everything the same way.
Right.
You design for specific audiences. You design for specific reading ages. You design for specific demographics. You do all sorts of ways of approaching something. Mostly, I'm an identity designer. That's what I do. I do identities for corporations. I do identities for small companies. I do identities for institutions, and I did identities for the government. And that the personality of the place is what begins to affect it, and that what you need to do as a designer is to try to find out what the spirit and intent is of the communication and the place, and make sure that you can make that engaging to someone else who would come upon it for the first time, and make them be interested enough to find out and read it. And that is really, I think, the job of a designer. And the situation, I think, in the United States is that we're so broken up in social media and also in not really reading, because the social media is very short, you don't have to read very much, and that there's a responsibility to make a more literate society. And I think that'll bring it together.
Yeah. This work, this project, I think one of its key things that it was trying to do was highlight what is the background of what the federal government does, which are mostly things that are invisible. And you know, like the Clean Air Act is estimated to save 200,000 lives a year in the United States. You don't notice not dying. That just seems like life. But it allows, when you don't notice it for long enough, it allows people to go, do we really need the Clean Air Act? And if that's buried inside of a report, it never surfaces, and that's a lot of what this role is. And I think there's a certain tragedy to this project.
Yeah, it's tragic right now. I mean, all these people I work for got fired.
Yeah.
And they were doing something important, and nobody knew what they were doing. And the United States does not understand its own government. And the government is partially responsible for being so protective that they didn't communicate appropriately with the citizenry. They didn't make the material available. When they did it, you couldn't read it, and you didn't want to look at it, and all of that happened. And I think it's a failure for all of us. And I think this is a design community here, and there's an important role of design in society, and that is to let people know what the hell is going on, and make your viewpoints in your design clear. If the point is read the article, make the reading so easy to read. Make it so that you can find it and read it. Make it beautiful when you can. Get somebody to turn a page. Get somebody to go to the next web story. Make them follow it through. And this is what we're here for, and this is what we should be doing. The end.
Amen.
Amen. Well, I think another thing that you're getting at too is like, I sometimes think when we think about design, whether it's a graphic or a project, I mean, everything's different, but you know, you can do more than one design. And I think like often what I would have to do as a reporter is not just, you know, have the big investigative story. I'm almost positive none of y'all have read any of the investigations I've worked on, and I'm not even offended. They're long as hell, right? But you may have seen a tweet. You may have seen an Instagram post, right? So oftentimes what I would do is like I would design some very detailed interactive graphic, but then I would have to create basically a static version of it, often with annotations that tried to just drive at the kind of key insight. And so to your point about things being buried, I've really had to think about like kind of like a multimodal kind of design approach, which is like depending on the platform, depending on the audience, you know, like sure, I wish more people read investigative reporting, and I wish more people read reports, but human nature is what it is, right? So What I can do, though, is meet you where you're at. So if you're going to only pay attention for 2 seconds on Instagram, I'm going to make sure I'm there. If you're only going to pay attention on Twitter, I'll be there too. If you're going to pay attention on LinkedIn, I'll be there as well, right? And so it's like having your designs be flexible enough and your approach be flexible enough that you'll meet people where they're at. I think that that's like a huge way to ensure that as new technologies come online, as people's attention spans shrink, you can still drive the point across. And to your point, hopefully, if you bring good design into that, people want to dig deeper. They want to turn that page, right? And that's where the other work you are delivering alongside, maybe that snippet allows people to dig deeper.
I have this friend of mine who is a musician, and he says that all art is this balance of comfort and challenge. That you're trying to give something a little bit comfortable, seduce them into experiencing it, but always trying to like add a little bit more to stretch the idea. That's what good art is. I used to get in this argument with this general manager at a radio station, KUOW in Seattle, and he said that the listenership of a story is 10 minutes long. That's when they're in the car, 10 minutes long. So you need to turn in stories that are under 10 minutes long. And I was like, no, that means we need to turn in stories that are 11 minutes long, because you make them stay a little bit longer. When you think about how this idea of presenting information, what is the balance of comfort and challenge where you're trying to move the story forward in ways that are surprising and not just give them what they want, that's just satisfying, that's the small tweet, get them into the longer investigation? Do you think about how to make that switch, or to do a little bit of the grit in there to make it change?
I don't know that that's always necessary. I mean, sometimes more people are motivated to do something and become active because of a poster.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, there can be a big, powerful image with 3 lines of type. It changes people's minds. I mean, so it's more how you're using it and what is it for. You know, I mean, if you're dealing with things that are data-driven and there's a lot of information, then you have to contextualize it, and you have to make it engaging to look at. Otherwise, you're just going to be in a blur. If you're trying to get somebody to get up and do something, a poster is going to do a better job, or a tweet.
It's about the audience.
How do you get a CEO to do something?
It's about the audience. So we do these trend reports for customers in the form of what we call a slide doc, where we just put tons of data in it, and it's their #1 downloadable and brings in millions of dollars. So it's really about like, who's going to receive this? How do they process information? What's the best thing to amplify? And what are they going to care about? So I think it is really about map to that. And then as far as then when you start to verbalize the data, if you're presenting it, people do like novelty. Like even the format of this, we're having a conversation instead of clicking through slides, because that's like, this is more novel. Every time one of us kind of speaks up and a voice changes, it creates novelty in the moment. And so I think just you have to lure and re-lure and engage and re-engage, especially if it's for big causes, big problems that we're trying to solve, is we have to keep regaining the attention from our constituents, from the people that need to hear the messages.
Well, we just have a little bit of time left. There's all these people in the room. They're designers, they're creatives. A lot of them are thinking, how do I be like you? How do I be on this stage? What advice do you have to give folks out there about the work you do and what path they should be on?
If you want to be like me, just be incredibly curious and don't take no for an answer.
I think mine was just a lot of grit and moxie. I only have a high school degree, and one of my customers paid for me to get an MBA from UCLA. So with all of that grit, I'm just the storyteller of the Silicon Valley and tell CEOs like what to say. So no matter what roadblocks you think you have, no matter what things have been thrown, you can do anything. You can do anything you want to do and change as many lives as you think you're called to change. That would be my tip.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
I would say find your own voice. Don't look at mood boards.
That's perfect.
Seriously. Find your own voice. Learn from what's around you, and don't follow it because it's terrific and you admire it. Find your own way of doing it, and it'll follow.
Well,
awesome.
It
thank
works.
you so much for joining us. Thank you all for being here. Aaron, Nancy, Paula, I appreciate it. We're good.
Thank you.
Thank you.